Hello, beautiful community. Just a quick one today. We'll keep this under 3 minutes. Just because a regime like Putin's ghastly regime is in crisis doesn't mean it's going to collapse, right? There's no doubt that the Putin regime is in crisis and that some of the challenges it faces are not problems it can put back in the box. It's not clear how it puts back in the box its partial loss of monopoly over organized violence, even if it gets rid of Wagner. But what we want to recognize is that two things can be true at the same time: that the regime is in deep crisis, but that it's also a regime that has disconcerting pliancy, resourcefulness to survive. It is a regime that has tremendous capacity for adaptability, partly because of its strange, informal shape. And we're going to see that. We're also going to see that increasingly in how Russia tries to bypass the attempts to economically and politically isolate it on the global stage. It will show all kinds of, it's already showing all kinds of remarkable capacities for permeation and pliancy there. So, two things at the same time. Crisis doesn't mean collapse for a political system. And, the same is true of our democracies. We tend to think that either nothing is wrong with our democracies or they are in crisis and they're going to collapse. But it's important to keep, again, two things in mind. That, yep, we do have a crisis of democracies, but we shouldn't catastrophize it. And this is, again, this age-old image that we're age-old. It's just the analogy I've been using, the metaphor I've been using for a few years, that we're coming out of the bay into open water, we Western democracies, but that does not mean that we're going to sink. It just means one or two of us could sink, the rest of us will have a tough time, but we're not in sort of flat-bottomed riverboats that are going to go down. So democracy too can coexist for years and years and years in a state of crisis without collapsing. So keeping these two things in mind is important. I mean, some of the tendencies of why we tend to say, oh, the Putin regime is in crisis and therefore it's going to collapse, are understandable, and we've discussed the info warring, the gamification of war. But there's also, I think, something else, and that's that there's a tendency, given our extraordinary secular and theological inheritance in the West, actually, to think that surely, eventually, somehow, there's got to be a tendency out there in the universe for bad things to go away. There's a tendency for good people to think that bad things must surely come to an end as well. So that's part of that story. We'll talk much more properly soon. Lots of love.